Darcy Piceu, welcome to the podcast. So good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Dylan. It's great to see you too.
It's been a long time. You were one of my
know.
earliest heroes in the sport, and maybe later on in the conversation we can recount some of our fun stories from the old Pearl Izumi days. But
someone just recently posted, I think it was today, I saw something that I Run Far posted about a Pearl Izumi photo shoot, and we were all there. And Nick Clark and Timmy Olsen and Scott Jaime and Ashley Nordell, and we were all there. Those were good times.
Legends. Maybe let's start here. Maybe let's just tell the story briefly of the somewhat intoxicated lap on Bear Mountain, or it was Green Mountain, I think.
I was thinking more about doing the worm on the dance floor.
That was the same night, I think.
It totally was. Yeah. We run far, and we also know how to have a good time as well. Yeah.
Well, I was the loser that night. It was you and Timothy Olsen and Nick Clark, Scott Jaime.
Yeah.
I think Ian Torrance was there, and after several beverages and some dancing, you guys did a midnight lap on Green Mountain. This is like circa 2011. So
I mean, it feels like yesterday, but it really wasn't. So
Anyway, I was very much in the peak of my partying career at that point. And so seeing legends like you and Timothy, Scott Jaime, and Ian Torrance all performing well at the bar made me think this is the sport for me. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for the early inspiration. Well, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you. And I feel like we have a ton to talk about. I think maybe taking it in three parts: you, the runner, you, the therapist / counselor, and you, the mother. I feel like that gives us three amazing identities and categories from which we can sort of shape the conversation. And maybe let's start with running. I was going back, as I was just telling you, and looking at some of your Instagram posts and revisiting some of your I Run Far interviews. And it was before Hard Rock last year that you were sort of, I think, dealing with a little bit of a, not identity crisis, but maybe a different relationship with the sport of running. So maybe let's just start there. Where are you with your running, specifically with competition, and maybe how has that evolved in recent years?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's continuously evolving all the time for all of us. And I think what I noticed over the last several years is just sort of a decline in terms of my motivation to truly race, like to get out there and be neck and neck with people. I think that's the biggest piece that sort of started to fall away for me. And I think I've just been sort of like trying to be more curious about, okay, what does this look like for me now? And it's gone in all different directions. I mean, there are days where I'm like, I've definitely gone through a period where I thought I didn't want to race again. And I think I'm just kind of discovering now that I really still truly love long day adventures. I love doing long runs. I love being in the mountains. And I love the community. So how do I, like, I'm still figuring it out right now, but I'm trying to, really just be clear about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and be super intentional with the choices I make and the adventures that I take on. And I did sign up for a couple of races, but some of it was related to dear old friends saying, "Hey, will you do this with me?" And of course I'm going to do that with one of my best friends from college to run another 100. And and I was hoping to get into my 10th Hard Rock this year, but I didn't get in. So then I just I had been, everyone had been talking about High Lonesome 100 for years. And I thought, maybe I'll just try and get into High Lonesome and just check out the course. And sure enough, I got into High Lonesome. So I'm going to do High Lonesome, which I'm excited about. I'm just excited to see a new course.
Yeah.
And that's kind of always been the spirit of the sport for me, is like, exploration and going to see a new place. And and then I have some upcoming really big personal adventures that I have coming up in the next month. So I'm super excited about that. And so I'm finding my way. I think we all face this time in our careers and our lives where we have to kind of figure out like what this sport looks like for us. And I'm there and there's no roadmap. And it's like, okay, what am I going to do now? As of late, I've been really throwing myself into my work. So I'm working a ton. I'm not running as much right now currently, but it doesn't mean that I don't love to get out there still. And it just looks a little different now. So that was a long-winded answer to your question. I could go on and on about it, but yeah.
And I feel like we could spend the entire episode just sort of reacting to that one answer, because I mean, you're fourth on the Hard Rock wait list. We're both fourth on the Hard Rock wait list right now.
Right now?
Yeah, we both are.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that.
Yes. I double checked.
This is how I operate.
Yeah. I double checked. So I don't think it's necessarily out of the question for you to get your point this year, but we don't need
well, then that'd be awesome. Then I can be done. And then my spot will be open for someone else.
But if not, High Lonesome seems like it'll be fun too. But you mentioned being intentional, and I think this will be a good lead into eventually coming around and talking about your work. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that you mentioned in your I Run Far interview, is just like really wanting to align with your intention and making sure that you have pure intentions, more or less. And I feel like now with this evolution in terms of your relationship with competition, it's a good opportunity to check in with that intention. I'm wondering if maybe you want to share a little bit about the practice of identifying your intention and making sure that it's pure.
Gosh, I mean, like, do you mean kind of how I go about doing that, or?
Well, one of the things that stuck out to me was that last year, the day before Bighorn, you pulled yourself out of the race. And then you sort of said that you were almost unsure whether you ever wanted to race again, but you decided you wanted to go to Hard Rock, and that it was very clear why you were there. So it more or less just sort of like how you go about figuring out what your why is and making sure that it's based on something that is pure rather than based on, chasing podiums still, because you've been doing that for 2 decades.
Yeah. I think it's, when I think about intention, I think about like the internal knowing part of what we all have, right? We all have that like internal part of ourselves that goes, yes, like there's a hell yes to the answer when we ask ourselves that, like a question of whether or not we want to do something. And so when that shows up for me, that's usually the cue for me. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but I think the difference is, or maybe the shift for me has been that instead of just sort of like, I guess just going, okay, I've got to do X, Y, and Z, and like checking off the boxes for myself. It's more about like, going inside, asking myself, what do I want and what do I want to do and what's important and what feels meaningful and authentic to me. And then like operating from that place, as opposed to, just sort of signing up for races because I think I need to sign up for races. Yeah. And I think I think I've kind of like ebbed and flowed through that over the years. But I'm finding more and more clarity, and who knows, maybe that's just getting older, or I don't know what it is, but yeah, I feel like I have a little more clarity. I mean, I spend a lot of time journaling, a lot of time actually like setting intentions for myself and like, what do I want to create in my life and what do I want my life to look like, those types of things. And that also maybe seems kind of simple, but it's something that I try to practice now on a daily basis.
So you actually put pen to paper to create those intentions and shape them and create a process towards them?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What does that look like for you?
I love it. I try to do it in the morning, like before going for a run, ideally, if I can. Right now getting in running is like, I try to squeeze it in before I go to work. And that's like maybe an hour or so at most before I go to work. I try to sit down. I try to do like a meditation and then do some journaling. And that's like, I'm trying to set actually like more daily intentions, but then like maybe weekly, there's sort of like a longer term intention that I'm setting for myself, whether it's focused on career or relationship or, running, whatever it might be.
This is fantastic. These are my favorite conversations, the ones where it sort of peripherally involves running, but where we can really go deep on more of the philosophical parts of our lives and parts of ourselves. On your website, it says something like it's often when our previous identities start to wane that we have our biggest opportunities for growth. And so in line with this conversation of your competitive instinct and your competitive identity waning, where do you view your biggest opportunity for growth right now?
Internal, all internal. That's solely what I'm focused on right now, is just like reconnecting. This is going to sound real cheesy, Dylan. But
bring it on.
Your brother can probably relate to this. It's really about, for me right now, is like reconnecting with my heart, like my heart center, and like feeling full regardless of what's happening externally. That's my sole focus right now. So, and regardless of if I can run or anything. So like, that's my priority. At one point, running was my priority, or at one point my daughter was my priority. I mean, and of course those things are still priorities. But this is up there now for me. Yeah. So
it makes me feel like we should just go ahead and start talking about your career and what you do professionally, and then come back around and talking more about running. You're a therapist, which we may have already mentioned, but it's probably clear with the way our conversation has started. But it takes a certain personality, I think, to want to shoulder the emotional burden for other people. So maybe just to start this part of our conversation, at what point did you realize you wanted to be a therapist, and why?
Really, it was just this knowing, like when I thought about what I wanted to do for work, career, I knew I wanted to help people. I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like, but I knew that I had to, if I was going to devote that much time to something, I had to feel like I was giving back to community, to like the greater good at large, I guess, if you will. So that was, I think that's like the what's pushing me, what's driving me in my work. And I work both in an elementary school, and I work also in private practice. So I have kind of had this range of ages that I work with, which is also really wonderful and rewarding and really challenging all at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to sort of like, so you knew you wanted to help people. What was it about therapy or counseling that aligned with your personality and with your goals for yourself? I mean, it takes, again, a certain person, I think, to want to shoulder other people's baggage, if you know what I mean. And is that something that has always been sort of part of your personality?
I don't know if it's always been part of my personality. I think I definitely witnessed family members struggling with mental health issues growing up. And so there was a part of me, I know, that probably was just wanting to understand the mind a little bit more, and wanting to like dive into that subject matter because of that, just because of what I saw growing up. And then, I mean, I think the real impetus was that I was leading wilderness courses for Outward Bound, like way back in the day, and in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. And I was working with adolescents who were really struggling, like being out in the elements, being in the mountains, brought all of this, all these things to the surface for these individuals. And so at the time, I didn't really have the tools to work with these people. Typically they were younger kids, but some adults as well. And I realized that I wanted to learn more about how to help people when those types of things showed up for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were just sort of talking about intuition and sort of connecting with your heart and sort of having at least a subtle awareness about what's right for you in given moments. And this is one of the biggest breakthroughs I had in therapy last year, was just the reliability of my intuition in hard moments and learning to trust it. Can you talk more about how you encourage the people you work with to listen to that subtle voice?
Yeah. Gosh, you just put it so eloquently. So thank you for that. I mean, I think it's that deep sense of knowing is different for all of us. So a lot of it is helping people to just be curious about, like, it could be like a somatic, like a body type sensation that you have, that is that all-knowing feeling that you're like, oh yes, this is the right decision for me. But it could look differently for someone else. So it's really about helping each individual to uncover what that looks like for them, because it's different for everyone, I think. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but for me, it's like, I talk about like your higher self and your smaller self, like kind of like not operating from the ego as much and operating from that, like your true self is what I call it. Like that you're really operating from a place of that part of you that when someone asks you a question, you just know the answer. It's just like it flows out of you. There is no question that shows up that's like there's no battle. There's no internal battle there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's like the ease of and the flow of what shows up for you is what you trust. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to use my own personal example without going into much detail, I was just struggling with a really like existential question where there was major consequences in both directions. And my therapist was just like, what does your intuition say? And it was so clear what my intuition said. And so finally I aligned my actions with my intuition, and it turned out to be absolutely the right decision for me. And ever since then, I've just always sort of thought like, okay, what does my intuition actually feel in this moment? And it's been a fairly powerful and very simple tool that I think people can practically apply.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about like trusting yourself, which is, I think sometimes goes back to just feeling like you're connected to that, what I was talking about, that heart center. If you're connected to that, you have to trust that you know what the right answer is for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that's kind of what you're speaking to.
Definitely. But it takes practice. And I think this is another great thing for you to just chat about, because you talk often about the importance of mental training. And you have a calm, peaceful demeanor about you. And I wonder to what extent, the nature versus nurture question, like to what extent do you actually practice? You mentioned sort of the journaling and meditation. So if you want to say anything else about sort of the practical mental training and the consistency that it takes, I think people would find it valuable.
Well, I do think consistency is the key. I think consistency and like repetitiveness is super important. So yeah, I mean, I would go as far as to say that every day, if you can get, some type of, what I say is just stillness practice, or a sitting practice, like basically just the art of non-doing. So not necessarily like something you have to like add into your day or something that you have to like strive for or a goal to get to, just that you have time set aside every single day where you're just sitting and the mind can wander, but you bring your focus back to your breath. And something, for everyone, it's different. I mean, I've worked with someone for years who says no less than 30 minutes. But sometimes when you say 30 minutes to people, they're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to spend 30 minutes sitting on a cushion. But, some people would argue that lasts, it takes 20 minutes for the nervous system to kind of come down. And then it's that last 10 minutes of time where your nervous system is finally sort of settled, where you're actually getting like the real juice from the practice. But I encourage people, even if it's 5 minutes, that's great. But just to find that time and consistency every day, I think is really important. And I try to do that. For me, it has to work for you. Like whatever the time is a day, it has to work for your schedule and for, your clock. I have to do it in the morning because I know if I don't, it never happens. It won't happen for me beyond that time. So, and that's usually before anybody else is up, namely my daughter. But I have a teenager now, so that's not hard. She's sleeping. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's obviously relatable for athletes, right? Like training is the core part of whether or not we achieve our goals or not. And when you put it in that context, I think it becomes a lot more approachable to athletes. So maybe this is a good opportunity to bring it back to running and your illustrious career that spanned more than 2 decades. To what extent do you attribute that success to the mental training that you've always employed in your career, and maybe anything else that you can add about just like the steadying nature of making that a core part of your life?
Well, I wouldn't say that I was a religious, I didn't have a religious meditation practice all those years, especially not when I was in my 20s. I would say it came to me more like in my 30s, I would say. And so, I mean, I don't really, I've always been asked that question. And I think it's an inherent like internal drive that I have that has pushed me for so many years. And it's not something that, I don't think it's something you can like train into someone. I think it's just there or it's not. And where that comes from, I don't know, it could be, familial, it could be genetic, who knows? But I think that it's funny. I had an experience recently where I go in waves. Like there are days where I want to push myself. And then there are days where like I'm like repelled by it. And it's really interesting. And I try to actually now what I try to do, and I think this is where I'm learning to listen more, is that when I'm feeling like repelled by pushing myself, I don't push myself. I choose to go to yoga or not run at all, or sit on the cushion, or, just not get out at all that day. Whereas I think early on, I would have like beaten myself up to get out the door, to train, and I don't do that anymore. So that was a big shift for me. And that really has only happened over the last 2 years, I would say, 1.5 years. But so, yeah, so there's a lot of things that are in transition now, but I don't know if I really answered your question.
No, you definitely did.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm also curious. I mean, being in the sport now for 20 plus years, that means that you got into it way before it was cool. And I'd love to know.
Oh, it was cool back then.
Right. Well, yeah, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. But I mean, you were a pioneer, especially in the women's side of the sport. I mean, you're first ballot Hall of Famer. I'd love to hear why the sport spoke to you at that point in your mid 20s and who some of your early influences were.
Yeah. Early influences were, well, I don't even, you know, Stephanie Arrett and Peter Backwin. I don't know if you remember when they were.
Their names. Yeah, I know their names.
Yeah. I mean, they were, Stephanie was really inspiring for me really early on. And I definitely took whatever advice they were willing to give me to heart. And I think that even to this day, a lot of the things that Steph and Peter shared with me were really good bits of information, like just little things like keep it simple and run your own race. I mean, those are like the two probably biggest nuggets of wisdom. If you can actually embody those things, are pretty essential. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I was following. I feel like when I entered in, the women that were actually winning at the time were in their 40s. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool. And when it shifted to like, I feel like when I was in my 30s, then all the women who started winning were in their 20s, right? Like, so the sport just got younger. Mm-hmm. And younger. You saw way less people that were in it way less people in general, but way less people who are younger in the sport initially. Yeah.
So then, like, thinking about your career as a whole, I mean, 100 plus ultra finishes over 20 plus years, call it 5 finishes a year. I mean, that's remarkable consistency over time, just participation, let alone like actual performance. What do you attribute that to? I mean, just like the steadiness over time, what sort of bits of wisdom do you think people could implement to have similar consistency and longevity?
Not overtraining. I really don't log that. Like, I just don't log high mileage hardly ever. So, but I don't know if that works for everybody. Right. I've always kind of adopted that, I think, only because I try to seek out more balance in my life. I think that it's like I have work and my daughter, and, I tend to not pour everything. Running is not like number one for me. So I think that's helped me to like have longevity in the sport. I also didn't run in college, so I didn't pound on myself in college. Oh. So I was really fortunate that I didn't suffer a lot of injury early on. And I had like a lot of years where I was injury free. So I was really fortunate, like whether it was that my body was just well designed for ultra running, I'm not sure, but I was really lucky in that sense. Yeah.
Was running ever number one for you?
Maybe.
But the fact that
it feels like it was short-lived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that it's like, it takes a lot of thought to give that an answer indicates that you have been well balanced and you've had a lot of other things that have been personally, emotionally, psychologically stimulating over that time. Do you want to say anything about the value that, that being well-rounded and well-balanced can bring to athletic performance specifically?
Well, I think if we put all of our eggs into one basket, it's never a great thing. Right. You're sort of like guaranteed disappointment. Yeah, I mean, when I think about longevity, I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. You're making me think a lot, Dylan.
Well, I think that I am similarly, at a moment in my career where things are changing and you have those internal struggles of, do you sort of try and keep the dream alive in order to satisfy some sort of like outward perception of yourself and keep that, sort of like, what is at the forefront? Or do you follow the intuition and to like actually kind of, like forge a new path and turn a new page and enter a new chapter? And I think that's often like a really difficult period of people's lives,
Very difficult. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, people don't talk about it that often. So I appreciate that we're talking about it, just this transition of, I mean, we all age, right? We all get older. We all have to decide, like, do I keep doing this thing that I really love, or do I give it up completely? And I'll never give up running completely. I hope, knock on wood, I hope my body will hold out for me for as long as it can. Whether or not I'm like out doing 100-mile races forever, I have no idea. I kind of adhere to like never say never. And I'm still figuring out this transition for myself really right now. And I think it's something that like, there's no, I don't think anyone has like the right answer. You have to just figure out what's right for you. Right. And what path you're going to take. And it keeps kind of changing for me, honestly. Like I said before, some days I think I'm not going to race anymore. And then a friend reaches out and says, "Hey, come do Bighorn with me." So, you just, it's, and then you just trust your gut.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it's more about like, can I get to the start line and be okay with not winning anymore, and that's hard, right? That's all ego. So, that there's a lot of that work that I think has to be done.
What has been your relationship with competition over the year? Because you've never struck me as somebody who has really put all your emotional or like self-identity into whether you win races or not. Is that a mischaracterization? Are you more competitive than you come across?
I think I'm definitely competitive for sure. I mean, I don't think you do this sport and do, race for this long without having an internal competitiveness, part of your personality. That's definitely a part of me. And I like it to some extent, I think. And I actually, there's something about suffering I like I kind of like that element of our sport. But I think now it's shifted to like, I can see the difference between unhealthy and healthy. And I don't know if I necessarily had that perspective. I think there was more of a, like, I have to beat myself up to feel relaxed at the end of the day. But now I don't feel that anymore. And that's huge. That's like a huge relief. But I think you realize after, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but you realize after race after race after race, you realize like, oh, it feels great for a little bit. Right. But it's just, I don't know. It's just running. It's just a race. It doesn't define you. Mm-hmm. It's not like, it's even weird for me to think how much, sometimes I think I can't even believe I did that I've been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
And how much time I have spent on the trails. And it's wild to think about. It really is. And I don't even think a lot of the times I had that like perception of it. I didn't even realize how much time I was taking to do this sport. Mm-hmm. But I think as I've stepped back a little bit, I have I have more perspective on it.
Along those lines, I'd love for you to talk about kind of decoupling who we are from what we do. And, sort of in the conversation about moving into new chapters as athletes, it's also a point where you have to really kind of confront your personal identity. And as a therapist / counselor, I'm sure this is something that comes up in your practice quite a bit of, not getting so caught up in the stories that we're telling ourselves and in subjective feedback we may be receiving from the outside world, but instead sort of, like you said earlier, kind of aligning with our intention rather than a perceived identity. Is there anything there you want to expand on?
Yeah. I guess there's a lot there. I think it goes for me when I think about my identity as a runner. I know now that, like, I think it's going back to connecting with that whatever you want to call it, soul or heart center or spirit or whatever it is that however you label it for yourself. But I think when you connect with that part of yourself, you realize that you're so much more than the sport of running,
right?
Or whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's your career or your sport or whatever it is that you are, that's not who you are.
Right.
And we could get into like the who you really are part of it. But that might be for another topic, another day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you're just the one, like, watching the play unfold. Yeah. So I think there is a little bit of a detachment from, like, when you're overly identified with that part of yourself. I think that's when we can spiral and suffer a little bit more.
I'd love for you to talk about the movement-based therapy that you do. I think we can all identify as runners, the time outside and the importance that we find in just like being alone on the trails. And there's the cliche that running is my therapy, which has a lot of truth in it for a lot of people. But I'd love for you to talk about the value of movement-based therapy and its practical application with people who don't necessarily devote their lives to trail running.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think you just spoke to something I had that in my mind before when you asked a different question about, just being out in nature. And that, for me, at least, connecting with the natural world is where I find my, like, truest self. And I think that in a traditional office setting, for some, it can feel really confining. It can feel really restrictive, and maybe people are a little apprehensive to share, or be vulnerable with someone that they've just met, right? So, and I find you get people outside and moving on the trails, not running, just walking, that people feel more comfortable to share and to talk about what's going on in their lives. I think sometimes more so than they can in a, like, traditional office setting where you're sitting across from someone and it might feel kind of awkward.
So yeah, you started your career, I think, and you still work with a lot of kids, young people. And of course, you also work with adults and I think a lot of athletes as well. Can you talk about that evolution in your career and maybe the difference between kind of interacting with the youth and the challenges that they specifically face in today's world?
Yeah. If my daughter was listening, she'd be like rolling her eyes at me right now, because I preach to my daughter and to a lot of parents and teens about technology and the importance of helping teens and kids to regulate their usage, because I do see it as, this might not go over very well, but it's like, I feel like it's like the cancer in our society right now, especially for youth that are growing up with social media and having phones, and they are in a lot of ways, it's unavoidable to at some point give your child a phone. And it's hard. It's really hard to navigate as a parent. And, but I do think like, right. So these things were devised to be addictive, and our kids are going to get addicted if they're not already. And so we actually have, as parents, we have to regulate it for them. So I do a lot of like educating with parents around like setting screen limits and the importance of that, and like really setting rules and guidelines for children around phone usage, because it's causing a lot of depression. It's causing a lot of anxiety for kids. And there's tons of research out there on this. So I don't know. Yeah, that's like, again, that's probably that's a whole other podcast in and of itself too. But I feel like that's like the main overarching challenge that I see. And then there's COVID that impacted all of us. And then in particular, I think it impacted the younger generation, because not only did it put them back academically, because a lot of kids did not do well with online learning. Oops, sorry, my earplug went out. But it also, I think it created this sense of isolation for a lot of kids. So a lot of kids were on their devices, isolated in their house, not connecting on a human level with their friends and peers and teachers and whatnot. So I think we're going to be dealing with the aftermath of that for many years to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just reading about this stuff today. And of course, I'm a new dad and can't help but worry about the digital world that my son's going to grow up in. Mm-hmm. There's also startling statistics about the drop in participation in youth sports. Mm. And it's something that I think you and I both recognize to be massively important in our lives at a young age. I mean, I know you weren't a runner, neither was I, but I was a team sports athlete. And without that, I have no idea what would have happened to me growing up, but it was the one thing that provided purpose and structure in my life as parents. And now obviously that activity has transformed into being out in the mountains and doing the thing that you and I both really love. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add about like youth participation in sport, or the way that you and Sophia interact to sort of ensure that the next generation also experiences the simple joy of just being outside with friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so important. And for, her dad and I encourage her to be in sports. And we will throughout high school. She's entering high school next year, and she swims almost every day and runs once or twice a week with teams. And we'll continue that in high school. And I think it's very important. I know that not every child has resources to do those things. So I think it's really important that, that teams like the great thing is like middle school, there are team sports, typically high school, there are team sports. Right. So there's opportunity for kids who might not have resources to like access certain sports. But there's opportunities, I think, once they enter into middle school. And, I think whatever it is, it could be disc golf. It doesn't matter. But I think, yes, I think it's great so sport. Important. Yeah. I mean, I think for them to have something that they do that gets them outside, that's physical. I mean, fresh air, exercise, they're utmost importance for sure. I mean, fortunately, video games are not a part of our life. But it is a lot of kids are completely, plugged in and doing that regularly after school. And again, it's hard to fight all of it because school now runs on computers, right? So they kind of have to be on devices to do schoolwork. So yeah, it's sort of a constant, thing that we're trying to find, trying to find balance with. And, but yes, I think it's really important for us to keep our daughter in sports.
So to bring it back to your athletic career, obviously Sophia has been a big part of it. I'd love for you to just say a few words about how you've used running and your position within it to have a positive influence on Sophia, and how has it added depth to your guys' relationship?
I think it's changed, right? I mean, when they're little, they're like, I think they're looking up to you, and it's in some ways it's harder because you come in and out of an aid station and they're like, where are you going? Right. They can't really understand it. They can't comprehend why you'd come in and leave again. But I do think, now I pick and choose what I involve her in, because I think it can be too much to like involve your child in all of it. But I think just without necessarily trying, I have inspired her in some ways. And I also at the same time have to be really careful about not pushing her. And I think this is going to sound kind of weird, but because I've been successful in running, I know she sees that. And so I don't want her to think that she has to win to be okay. Right. To be successful. You can, and I think that's something that we talk with her a lot about, because both her dad and I have raced a lot and done well in sports, and just keeping her out there regardless of how she's doing is super important. So, it's finding a balance of like, now it's really not, I mean, it's not about me anymore. She's got her own thing. She's doing her own sports, and we're just there trying to like support her, encourage her to stay in it. And I think boys and girls are a little bit different. Like at least girls, as they enter into like teenager years and hormones and all the things, that for me, it's really about just keeping her invested and interested in something. Because I think it's hard because their body changes, and you see a lot of kids falling off because they're like, oh, my body's changing and I don't want to stay in the sport. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's all about just, it doesn't matter if you're winning, just stay in it as long as you enjoy it.
It's almost a great opportunity for you as you sort of transition out of the period of your life where you're really interested in chasing podiums, for Sophia to see you to still being active within the community and pursuing what you love in the outdoors without that podium performance as the vindication, validation, or, ultimate reward at the end of the practice. That's
right.
Maybe along this line too, I'd love to hear you talk about, just sort of aging as an athlete and the way in which people can do it gracefully. This is certainly something that I think about quite a lot. And you, again, have been so successful over the course of more than 2 decades and have provided, I think, a great example of how you can age with grace as a professional athlete. Is there anything there that you'd like to expand on?
Sometimes it doesn't always feel graceful. So thank you for saying that. We talk a lot about balance and how to find balance. And I think I'm learning more about that and trying to be a little bit more deliberate about being more balanced in my life in terms of not just running, but, you know, and everyone talks about cross training, but I think I'm implementing that even more so now. I'm implementing more strength work now than I probably have in the past. And paying attention to like, when do I need to really be, I mean, my Theragun is like my best friend now. So I'm like walking around the house with my Theragun now because I realize how important it is to stay, to not be as tight all the time. You know, I got away. I was really fortunate. I got away with doing very little of anything besides running for a really long time. And now I'm much more in tune with when I need to, like I said before, you know, take a break, go to yoga instead of run, maybe get on a bike in the summertime. I'm a fair weather biker. And like the wintertime, I ski a ton. So like every opportunity I can, I am doing skimo. So that is like, skiing is my other passion. So I usually am skiing every single weekend, and whether that's uphill skiing, downhill skiing, or just alpine skiing. And I think there was a couple winters there where I was trying to train through the winter, and that was not a good decision for me. Like I have to have my winters be more focused on skiing. And that kind of helps me mentally reset too. Mm. And then my desire to be out there running, I feel like comes back more easily.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So kind of moving towards the end, some philosophical things. Did you watch the Stutz documentary on Netflix?
Yes.
So good, wasn't it?
So good. I loved everything about it. I think when I watched it, I laid in bed and just wrote notes. I just took notes on the whole thing. Yeah.
I kind of did too. And I watched it twice. And I think some of the principles are just those like really elegant, clean, simple solutions that you can just keep in the back of your head forever. But one of the
absolutely. And it's beautiful. Like their relationship, I think is just so beautiful to watch. Yeah. And I think that's like, oops, sorry. I thought I had the do not disturb. I do have it on. That's weird.
Hopefully it's not an emergency.
Sorry, Dylan.
All good.
Sorry about that.
We can.
Oh my God, is that going to be in the podcast?
No, we can probably cut it out. It doesn't matter if it is.
Oh God. Wait, now I don't even see you. So weird. Oh, there you are. Okay.
There we go. Well, I mean, one of the things that I thought was cool about the film is that it sort of has the underlying theme of no matter how successful you become, you're never going to be free from sort of hard work and pain in a lot of cases. And I think for a lot of us, we always have this instinct that at some point in the future, I'll hit some new status and be able to relax and be happy forever. And I wanted to talk about shifting the focus as a therapist from cultivating happiness from external sources versus shifting that focus internally.
Like how to do that?
Yeah, or just, I don't know if it's, I mean, asking you how to do that is maybe too much, but yeah. Any comments? Yeah. I think that was just sort of like the main takeaway from the documentary for me was just the fact that it's never going to end. You know, you got to find peace and calm in this moment.
Yeah. Well, I think you find that, you know, if you're chasing the carrot, you're always going to be chasing the carrot. You're never going to really catch it. Right. I mean, you've probably won and done every race that you're going to win and do right at this point. So it's kind of like, what else? So happiness doesn't come from that medal you got from your race. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. It only comes from within.
Yeah.
And that only comes from a lot of personal work. Sometimes it's allowing really painful situations to be sort of like a a wake up call, or, I oftentimes think like the hardest experiences we have in our life are our greatest teachers. So I'm always kind of in that space of, diving into that, and pain can also be a really good teacher to us along those same lines, both, emotional pain and physical pain.
At the risk of asking a personal question, can you provide an example of a hard moment that ended up being your greatest teacher?
Relationship ending and feeling like it's the end of the world, but really it was the calling to go to like reconnect with myself and to like really find clarity in what direction my life was going in. And I think that can come, and I think too, just with this transition in running too, it's been really challenging. And so, but running is like one of the best teachers as well.
Is there any sense of grief in this transition in your running?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not necessary. I haven't really like attached too much of a story to it. There has been sadness around it, without much of a story, but just,
Is it the story that makes things painful in a lot of cases?
Oh, always, always. That's where we suffer. Yeah. When we attach story to the feeling, then we suffer. Yeah.
That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very true.
Well, Darcy, I feel like I owe you some money for this therapy session. It's been super fun to reconnect and chat, but couple more like, philosophical closing questions for you before I let you go. Number one is, who is one person that you admire inside or outside of sport, and why is it that you admire that person?
I read that question and I really had to think for a long time about it. Rock Horton is like a kind of like a brother to me. So inside the sport, I would say him. And I don't know, everyone on this podcast knows Rock, but
no.
Yeah, just his genuine nature and how authentic he is and how true to his own personal values he is something that I really admire and respect. And he's also, longtime hard rocker, et cetera, et cetera. And he's in my opinion, he's like a force in the ultra running community. And then I think, just in general, outside of the sport, sorry, my cat's attacking me. Really just people who are like authentic and genuine and vulnerable. And like, I appreciate having these kinds of conversations. It's really fun that we can sort of like come back to this. And I mean, you're a lot younger than I am, but like, even just seeing you, like, grow in this sport and all the success that you've had, and then being able to come back to this kind of like really cool, heartfelt conversation is really meaningful to me. So, yeah.
Thank you. Rock Horton is an absolute legend. I got to get him on the pod eventually.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely.
Yeah. Final question for you here, Darcy, then we'll let you go. What is one truth that you've learned about yourself or about life in general through your long, storied, super successful career as an athlete?
I couldn't come up with one, so I had to come up with multiple. Is that okay? Can I share a couple?
Go ahead.
I had to write them down too, because I did really love that question. It's going back to the simplicity piece that simplicity is the key. And what I've found is that the things I'm most grateful for in life are the simplest things. The other is we can do hard things. Again, pain is sometimes our greatest teacher, and our bodies have an incredible ability to heal themselves.
Beautiful. What a great place to end. Darcy, thanks so much for coming on the pod. Thanks for being one of my personal inspirations in the sport.
Oh, likewise, Dylan. Thank you.
I hope we both move off the hard rock wait list and we can go do that lap in the San Juans together this summer.